I'm Professor David Wilson. As a criminologist, I'm often asked, what's it like to interview a murderer?
As you can see here, everything in this room is audio taped.
To answer this question, I'm going to take you on a journey into the dark heart of the police interrogation room. Using cutting-edge lip-sync technology, we'll bring to life the actual taped confessions of some of the world's most notorious killers.
I put tape on her mouth, held it there so she couldn't breathe.
And bring you face to face with evil.
I felt sick looking at him, knowing what he did.
And along with forensic psychologist, Professor Michael Brooks, I'll analyze their interviews in unparalleled detail.
Her skull gave way a little bit. She was there immediately unconscious.
Their wicked words, now seen spoken for the very first time, will never be forgotten.
So I didn't suggest to him that we kill her on Sunday, but I knew that she had to be gone.
The killer who we examine in today's episode is a man who thought he committed the perfect murder. He was engaged to be married to a wealthy children's author called Helen Bailey, but Helen mysteriously vanished. When arrested on suspicion of murder during his interview at the police station, he was what I call silent and uncommunicative. When presented with the damning evidence, he could barely utter a word and offered no assistance to the police or defense to the accusations. Yet prior to his arrest, he was both vocal and detailed in the help he offered to investigators. His conversations with the emergency services and during police visits to his house were recorded. The first of these was his rambling 999 call to report his fiancée missing. Closer analysis revealed it to be a complex, constructed story in which he displays duping delight, the belief that he's created a watertight tale and relishing the fact that those listening to him believe him. Yet the disappearance of Helen Bailey did not make any sense to those who were closest to her. Police felt the same, and further scrutiny was given to their suspect. On closer questioning, his facade as a man who was consumed by grief and confusion collapsed. All attempts to deceive the authorities ended when Helen Bailey's remains, along with those of her beloved dachshund Boris, were found immersed in the septic tank beneath the garage. So who is this killer who murdered for the oldest reason in the world, not love, but money? Ian Stewart. On the 15th of April 2016, an unemployed computer programmer called Ian Stewart made a 999 call to the emergency services.
Hertfordshire Police, how can I help?
Hello there. My partner has been missing since Monday.
This murder isn't particularly shocking among murders in its violence or any of its sort of sexual activities. It's shocking in the way that he targets a widow. It's shocking in the way he disposes of the body of someone he was going to marry in a cesspit.
It's a terribly sad story because she was clearly devoted to a man who was pretty callous and cold-blooded, and he just took utter advantage of everything she offered.
He was very good at working up a story and convincing her that he loved her, so much so that she agreed to marry him. I think ultimately the goal was always financial gain.
Ian Stewart was a cold and calculating and manipulative killer. He wasn't somebody who stood out from a crowd, he actually blended into the background.
Here was a flaccid, spineless, cowardly, low-grade, lying financial predator. A very British crime.
The 999 call that Ian Stewart made on the 15th of April was the first indication to the authorities that his fiancée, Helen Bailey, was missing. He claimed that she hadn't been seen in 4 days.
Please, how can I help?
Hello there. My partner has been missing since Monday and not contacted anyone. Said she was going away, hasn't ended up where she said she was going. So I just decided we should report it.
What's your partner's name?
Helen Bailey. She left a note. She said in the note something like, I need space and time alone. I'm going to Broadstairs. Please don't contact me in any way. But in Broadstairs, we've got a cottage down there, but people have been down there with neighbours, and she's not there. Hasn't been there either.
And someone's been to the cottage and
someone's been to the cottage, yeah. My brother went there.
Did it look like anyone had been in there?
No. Someone went in and it doesn't like anyone's been in there.
Did Helen go in a vehicle?
No, she didn't. She left her car here. She did take her dog with her. She's got a little Dachshund. But she could get there by train, or she could possibly take a taxi. She does do that sort of thing.
And was that note a bit of a shock? Were you expecting it at all?
No, I wasn't. Well, yes, it was a shock. She has talked about it, but it was still a shock.
Yep.
She has talked about wanting space because things just haven't been going well for her recently, or for us.
Okay, so she mentioned wanting space, but she'd never actually acted on it. She'd not left before.
She'd never done anything like this before, no.
I'm joined by Professor Michael Brooks. In his long and illustrious career as a prison psychologist, Michael has sat and listened to many murderers and experienced firsthand the mind games they'll play. On one level, that sounds quite charming and disarming. Here's this man very concerned about his partner who's gone missing for days. But there's something that doesn't really add up, despite the fact he goes into great detail.
Well, he's trying to get onto the front foot. He realises that others within the community will start noticing that Helen is not around, that she's missing, and will start asking questions. So to preempt that, he decided to make the 999 call to the police.
Do you think he thinks he's charming when he makes that call?
Not necessarily. He's just attempting to let the police know that Helen is not at home, in case anybody reports to them that she's not around or she seems to be missing, but hasn't thought through the narrative of what he's going to say to the police. And where they ask simple questions, that's when he becomes confused, unable to answer things that he knew.
And the note is mentioned for the first time. And crucially, the note suggests, he says, that Helen is unhappy.
So he's not able to maintain a consistent story or to put into place in the right order the things that are of most importance. And all of that will lead the police to come to an understanding that actually something's not quite right here, we need to investigate further.
Hello there, my partner has been missing since Monday and not contacted anyone. Said she was going away, hasn't ended up where she said she was going.
It's your inroad into the case. Missing persons are a minefield, and if somebody has committed murder in a domestic situation, obviously that's your first thought, is the person who makes the call. So you're going to look at that in minute detail.
There's certain clues that are given away by the person making the call. Ian Stewart, he's telling the story of poor old me, woe is me, and I'm left on my own, and what can I do? Can you help?
He presents this bumbling, charming, innocuous personality. He does not actually see himself as an offender. He genuinely doesn't, even though he knows what he's done. In his mind, he actually is the victim of circumstances, and this comes across in the way he presents himself.
He's of limited intelligence and incompetent. And so he just kind of bumbles along, being increasingly brusque and dismissive and indignant without thinking of the implications. He hasn't got the mental capacity to understand that these things have consequences and that he needs to rehearse how to make those consequences plausible.
And it's interesting the way the dog disappeared as well. If she'd just gone out shopping and hadn't come home, surely she would have left the dog.
And what's her date of birth?
Oh, crikey. God, she phoned me there. 22nd. Right, just let me double check. 1 second. Oh, God. Sorry. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just double checking you. 22nd of August, 1964. Sorry, my brain just went, sorry.
And her eye colour?
Oh my God, how do you forget these things? Sorry, God, that's terrible.
Are there any specific concerns? Suicide or self-harm, anything like that?
Well, I would say no, but she has been very, very anxious and very worried about lots of things, and she's a warrior. She's a natural warrior.
What's missing, Michael, is this incredible detail about his anxiety for his partner, Helen. And yet when he's asked directly, do you know the colour of her eyes? Do you know the date of her birth? He hasn't a clue.
Well, the anxiety comes not from concern about his partner. The anxiety comes from he knows that he's committed an act of murder. He knows that people are going to start asking questions, and he knows that he's going to have to start providing some answers, but he hasn't thought things through about what to say in detail, and therefore he's scratching around for things to say, and therefore talks incessantly because he has nothing of substance behind that.
You're living with this woman you're supposed to be in love with. You don't know what colour her eyes are. It beggars belief. And then you don't know her birthday. Anybody would think, surely, how close is this relationship?
Of course, he passes us all off as him being sort of worried and that, but it's strange that he doesn't know these things about the woman he's meant to be marrying. And all in all, he's a pretty unconvincing person.
She was obviously head over heels in love with him, but it didn't appear to be reciprocated in any form.
This may sound silly, but she's definitely not at home, no.
No, the father last night, I've literally checked everywhere. We have got quite a large house, but I've literally checked everywhere. And her phone is just dead. It's not, well, I say dead, it just doesn't ring.
She said nothing to you then? Was she leaving the premises at that time?
No, I left her here.
And then that final thing said by the person who answered the 999 call is quite chilling, because basically he was asked, is your partner still at home? And that's exactly where she was.
But also the person who was answering the 999 call was realising, actually, this doesn't add up. Something's not quite right here. You're giving me this story about her not being there, but actually you're coming across as confused. You know no personal details about her. What actually is going on? Have you really checked? So their suspicions were raised right from the beginning.
Indeed, the police speculated that Ian Stewart wasn't the doting fiancé that he purported to be, and so they began to close in on the callous and calculating killer. Stewart has delivered what he believes to be a carefully choreographed 999 call to the police. With Helen's disappearance being treated initially as a missing persons case, he now throws himself into the role of concerned fiancé, putting up missing posters and canvassing friends and neighbours for help. But Stewart's 999 call has by now been subjected to intense scrutiny by detectives. They start focusing on particular passages of it, and alarm bells start to ring. The police decide to pay him a home visit to ask him for more information, and that interview was recorded by detectives. Ian Stewart once again puts on a performance, but it's a flawed one, and the cracks in his story begin to show. With Ian Stewart's 999 call under close scrutiny, police also began digging deeper into the pair's relationship to learn more about their life behind closed doors.
Helen Bailey was a very well-known author who wrote fiction for teenagers. She had a very established life, a beautiful home in Royston in Hertfordshire. Tragically, in 2011, when she was on holiday in Barbados, her husband drowned. After that, when she came back, she joined a Facebook group for bereaved people, and it was there that she met a chap called Ian Stewart.
We've got a man in his early 50s, had worked as a software engineer for a number of years, but had given up work because of ill health. His wife, Diane, died in 2010, and as part of the grieving process, he goes online to an internet bereavement group.
It was in this online bereavement group that Helen met Ian Stewart in October 2011, 8 months after her first husband had died.
She was vulnerable, but she's also open to finding love again. He filled that gap, and he filled it very well. He convinced her he loved her.
And eventually this materialised into a relationship, and it was a bit of a whirlwind romance between the pair.
He showers her with gifts and affection, and she's taken in by all this, and they end up moving into a house that she buys.
They planned to marry, and very quickly he became her happy ever after. She even called him her happy ever after.
When the pair of them did eventually announce their relationship, people were happy for them, but they were also a little bit perplexed just because of how outgoing and happy Helen was, compared to the kind of standoffish and aloof Ian Stewart. He wasn't as successful as Helen was. He was sort of a nobody, and Ian Stewart saw this as an opportunity, perhaps, to get ahead in life.
Over a period of time, he manipulated Helen to sign over basically all her wealth and all her savings, properties, etc., to him.
He then can see that he's onto a good thing here, and he realises that if she were to die, he will inherit a couple of properties and £1.8 million, and he begins to plot to bring that about.
And what he did was embark on a very elaborate process of deception in order to try and get away with this murder.
He's been prescribed with sleeping medication, and instead of taking it himself, it seems that he was plying Helen with it. She was becoming slightly disorientated, slightly forgetful, wasn't herself at all.
She was very worried about why she was getting so tired all the time. She was Googling, why am I falling asleep? And clearly not understanding, and he was maintaining this charade.
Ian Stewart then became slightly panicked that she was going to go to the doctor. He may give her a blood test or check her out somehow, and his caring, affectionate persona would be blown.
And it culminated on the April the 11th, 2016.
He ended up probably smothering Helen with a duvet.
He decided, because he was a coward, the best way to kill would be through suffocation.
And then disposed of her body in a cesspit underneath the garage of the home that they shared in Royston.
And then put the lid on it and parked his vehicle over it.
It's an extreme of disrespect for a partner, isn't it, to do such a terrible thing. It even killed the dog and put the dog down there too.
Of course, if Stewart was to make sure that his lie was to be believed, he knew that Helen would never go anywhere without her best friend, her beloved dachshund, Boris. To ensure his story would be credible to those who knew Helen best, Boris had to go.
He was really trying to make this seem like Helen had disappeared.
She was passionate about Boris, the dog, and everywhere she went, Boris went.
And he thought that if the pair were missing, it would seem like something had happened.
To put somebody in a cesspit and to kill her dog and also put her dog in with her just shows such a callous disregard. The manner in which he did it was just extraordinarily cold. And then what's really fascinating is what happened next. He continued his business for the day. He went off and saw his son, watched him play bowls, came back, had a takeaway, watched TV, and even texted Helen that night with a kiss on the text message, knowing full well that she was dead.
There was a property that they had down on the coast in Broadstairs that Helen owned, and Ian made this story up about the fact that she'd left him, she needed space, and she'd gone down to Broadstairs with the dog.
So he was in this mindset, obviously, where he's trying to create this narrative, this story, so that it covered what he had done.
4 days after Helen's murder, Stewart decided to make the infamous 999 call to the emergency services. The recording of this call was scrutinised by the police, and given their suspicions, they decided to visit Ian Stewart at his home. The police officers were wearing hidden recording devices, recent technology used by police that enables them to analyse the recordings for further evidence at a later date.
From what I understand, what we've discussed is that Helen was last seen on Monday, the 11th of April. I would like you to take me through what happened that day.
This is where I can't remember very well. I'll tell you what I can remember. She went out in the car just to get some milk or something, milk and bits, but came back almost instantly. I was upset because something had happened. She said, I'm never going to drive again. And at some point I had to dash out because I was late, so I could see I could be late, so not dash out. I'm pretty sure Helen Wade could write to me, but when I think back, I'm not so sure. So maybe she did, maybe she didn't. So I was in a rush then. At some point I saw the note on my desk from Helen. So then I went, and I can't remember what I did, what order I did this in. But I definitely ended up at the doctor's at some point. And when I woke up, I was sort of woozy. I felt a bit like I'd been on morphine in hospital. And I remember thinking, should I be driving? But obviously I did. So I either went to the doctor's or the dump, or maybe I went to the dump next day. But I remember bits of it. The first bit I remember is we loaded the car, or Helen loaded my car, with an old duvet and some boxes ready to take to the dump. So I either went to the doctor's or the dump, or maybe I went to the dump next day. Came up, I'm not sure.
Well, this is more of the buffoonish, blustering, bereaved fiancé, isn't it? That's the image he's trying to present.
That's the image he tried to present, but the police will see through it because they've been to enough cases where people have gone missing and know what the genuine response is. And they'll be thinking, this doesn't add up. You're acting in this sort of way, but you mention a note and you can't find it. This doesn't correlate.
The fact that that interview took place in his own home, sitting on his sofa, sitting in his armchair, surrounded by his books and possessions, would that make him feel more comfortable, or would it make him feel more ill at ease knowing what's happened to Helen?
Well, he has to construct a persona that he's concerned about somebody who's missing, so he overemphasises what people would normally do. He's having to assume a role of which he has no knowledge about how people normally act.
In a case like this, where she's disappeared for no obvious reasons, you would expect him to be slowly building up a level of distress and anxiety, and possibly elements of guilt. But there was none of that kind of behaviour that you would expect. People reported him as being too jolly.
Ian Stewart's odd behaviour and his lack of concern with the search was another red flag. There was a media frenzy about Helen's disappearance, however, and many of her fans sent wishes for her safe return.
She was a prominent author, so there were a lot of people who loved her and were following the investigation's progress quite keenly. So this was not something that he could just say, I don't really want to talk about it, and the police were going to let it go. It seems he was a pretty poor support for Helen, and that made the police suspicious.
You should go into the panicking anxiety, where's my beloved gone? You're telling the police, you're ringing up all the friends, you then start putting out posters, you try to get the police and the medium interested. Now, he could have done that because she was quite well known as a child writer. It would have made good story for the local papers, and the local reporters would have been on to that. He didn't play that very well at all.
In fact, he did several things to draw the police's suspicions onto him even further.
Making decisions like visiting a solicitor and trying to push through the sale of one of her homes, for example.
He changes a standing order so that there's a lot more money going into the joint account so that he can have access to it. I think it's £4,000 a month.
He was seen getting rid of a duvet that police suspect might have been included in the murder.
He goes on holiday during the investigation, which raises suspicions.
He says that she'd left a note, and then he says he'd got rid of it. It seems elementary that you wouldn't do that. It would be the prime piece of information that you'd want to pass on to the police, but somehow he manages to get rid of it.
He was incompetent from start to finish. It needed that level of consideration and looking into the future about the implications and what he can do and what he can't do for a sufficient period of time before the attention moves away from him. None of that occurred to him, apparently. It's just bungled.
They are red flags, absolute red flags, and no doubt were part of the reason that the police very quickly focused on Ian Stewart as the prime suspect. And indeed, what that shows is how greedy he was and how immediately he just wanted to get from getting rid of Helen to his end goal, which was claiming her estate.
Stewart is by now firmly under suspicion. Police had a motive, enormous financial gain by virtue of Bailey's will, leaving almost everything to her fiancé. But they didn't have a body. Where could he have put her? The truth was to be found very close to home. As the community continued to assist the police with their inquiries, a passing comment by a neighbour was to change the focus of the investigation. Helen Bailey lived in a large country house, one that had 2 septic tanks. One was in the grounds that the police had already searched, but there was another in the garage, the opening to which Stewart had hidden over with his car. Armed with this information, the police raised a search warrant and paid Stewart a dawn call. Stewart's reaction was once again recorded by the police. It's a fascinating example of how simple tactics, in this case getting a suspect out of bed with a surprise, can see a killer's carefully constructed facade collapse in seconds. Early in the morning, the police gathered outside Stewart and Helen's home to arrest him. The police often use this technique of early arrests to catch the suspect off guard.
He's asleep upstairs. Is he? Yeah, can you wake him up? Is that all right? Yeah. Oh, tonight? How did you get it? They were kind of banging in the doors. Morning, Ian. How are you? Okay, you've got a warrant to search the address.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Helen Bailey.
You're joking?
And of disposing her body to a likely to instruct the coroner and the theft of money of Helen Bailey. All right, do you want to sit down?
Bloody hell, why? What's happened? Don't tell me. We can't discuss it.
We can't discuss it at the moment. We'll talk to you when we get to the police station. All right?
Where is she? So we can't talk about it further now. So why don't we pop upstairs, get him dressed, and then we can have a full discussion about this. Oh, no, the garage door's open.
Well, a great deal went on in this particular section, and I suppose the question for me is he caught off guard because the police have turned up very early in the morning, or is he just simply trying to reveal what indeed had happened because he can no longer take it?
No, he's caught off guard. He's not thinking clearly and just responding instinctively.
He is a terrible actor. He just doesn't convince you at any stage at all. He just says, bloody hell, what? And he expects everyone to sort of think he's still innocent.
He was trying to act surprised and upset, but there was no emotion in it at all. Nothing. It was so clear that he knew this was coming and that he just had nothing, it seems to me, nothing left in him to even try and put on a front.
What do I do now? Seems to me that what is going on, that process of saying, I don't really know how to cope with this. I am in deep trouble.
So the party played with so when we pop upstairs getting dressed, we can have a full discussion about this. The camera's doors open.
He makes two parapraxises in Freudian terms. He refers to the garage on two separate occasions, which of course is where he's buried Helen and her beloved dachshund Boris. And so he refers, when he comes down the stairs, he says, "Are the garage doors open?" And then towards the end, he mentions the garage again. Is he trying to reveal that he killed?
Not consciously. So he's not able to hold in the key bits of information, and the distress within him of knowing what he's done, of having to hold and contain that, becomes increasingly difficult. So those slips that occur because he's not able to control what he says and how he says it.
Sometimes, because of stress and anxiety, you say the very thing that you don't want to say. Like, don't mention the war, don't mention where you've left the body. And because you're trying not to, you end up saying the very thing that you're trying not to say.
I think that this is almost a synaptic response, and that all he can manage is, oh, dear me, the evidence is in the garage. Have you checked the garage? Can you shut the garage for me? I don't know, it's pathetic.
Lying is so much more difficult than telling the truth. And when you're being interviewed multiple times and having to maintain the same story, you're always thinking about whether you're going to be tripped up. And then, of course, once the evidence starts to mount, there's even more pressure. And also, as well, how difficult it is to really commit a murder without leaving any trace. Virtually impossible to do.
The only thing the police didn't have was the body. Once the body was found, he'd had it.
As well as Ian's mentions of the garage, a neighbour directed the police towards a second septic tank at the property. Stewart had concealed the second septic tank by parking his car over it, and so the police hadn't seen it when they initially searched the property. Finding it was the vital breakthrough that detectives needed.
Many times it is that little bit of luck that just cracks a case.
A neighbour who had been living next door for 50 years pointed out to them that there was an additional cesspit. The police found it and eventually located Helen's body.
I think his choice of the second cesspit was very, very determined decision. He wanted to find somewhere that he would be able to control, and he knew that that was unknown to most people.
I think it was panic. I don't think he was the kind of person who had thought it through, and I don't think he was man enough to actually be able to remove the body and take it somewhere else. So by keeping it at home and putting it in the septic tank in the garage, that meant only he really was aware of where it was going to be found, or if it was ever going to be found.
Between the murder itself and finding Helen's body, 3 months had passed.
I don't understand why it dragged on so long.
There was a lot of criticism of the police for not finding the body sooner. However, you have to look at this in fairness. It was in a second cesspit, almost hidden in the garage. I mean, I think they did well to find it at all. And the fact, really, that they found it months later rather than a few hours or days didn't make any difference to the outcome. She was dead. The disposal of the body is always the murderer's biggest headache. At one time, of course, you needed the body to be able to prove the murder. So they started the industry of how do you dispose of the body. In his case, he obviously must have planned that.
Any decision in a commission of a crime, an offender has to weigh up the pros and cons of any particular action. Some serial killers will travel great distances to dispose of a victim's body because it separates them from the crime. But obviously with that comes risks. In some respects, hiding a body within the environment that you're in control of may I think probably give a false sense of security. There's no prying eyes, there's no risk involved. At the time of disposing the body, when the risk comes in is when the police are finally searching your property, then the evidence is damning to the extreme.
With the discovery of Helen Bailey's body, the game was up for Ian Stewart. Taken to the police station, he was now formally questioned about the murder for the first time. His response is telling. Gone is the bumbling, charming, chatty man who wanted to go out of his way to help the police. In its place is a wall of silence. When faced with the irrefutable facts and the undeniable evidence in the form of Helen's body, he was both unwilling and unable to confront the truth. And with it, he reveals himself to be one of the most cowardly killers imaginable, one destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
It's so shocking when a man whose whole persona is imbued with a victim style, a gentle, unassuming, innocuous style, turns out to be a violent murderer.
Helen's body being found in the septic tank was irrefutable evidence of Ian Stewart's involvement in her murder. Ian Stewart is now the main and only suspect in this crime. For the first time, he's questioned in the police station, and the police have more evidence against Stewart. When he visited Broadstairs after Helen's disappearance, he accidentally turned on her mobile phone and it connected to the Wi-Fi, enabling authorities to trace it.
You're the last person to see her alive. You don't report her missing for 4 days. The following day, you go to Broadstairs. I don't know why. Why did you go there? Did you see Helen on the 16th? Because according to the technical information we've got, her phone is in Broadstairs. And you're in Broadstairs. Was Helen there? She wasn't, was she? Or was she? You tell me. Did you see Helen on the 16th? Because according to the technical information we've got, her phone is in Broadstairs. And you're in Broadstairs.
Michael, this is the first clip of Stewart when he hasn't been either on the phone or in his own home. And there's a huge difference, isn't there, in terms of how he approaches those interviews between the garrulousness, the talkativeness when he's in his own home to what happens in the police station.
But the situation has also changed in that when he was talking excessively, then it was to try and distract and deflect people's attention away from him. Obviously, that was not successful. It had the opposite effect. Once he comes into the police station and is arrested, then the situation is completely different, and the police know that he is the chief suspect, and the evidence points all towards him.
I think he was probably rather shocked that it had come to that. I think he probably convinced himself that he was going to get away with it.
He's another person, I think, who thinks he's much smarter than the authorities. This was his clever plan. He was going to enrich himself, and when it goes against him, he just withdraws. It's another betrayal of Helen, and it's another betrayal of those who love her, because he won't simply come clean and say, yes, I was a swine, I did it, and this is what happened. He just wants to go into his corner and hope it goes away, I suppose.
Another damning piece of evidence against him was the CCTV footage of him taking a duvet to the rubbish dump, the same duvet he had used to drag Helen's body to the garage.
Did you kill Helen Bailey? Did you intend to kill her? Or was this an accident? What happened? She had died, she had been murdered in your house. As part of that clean-up operation, you took that duvet to the dump. That's quite a big accusation for me to make to you, isn't it? Would you agree? Was that duvet taken to the tip because it had Helen's blood on it?
Even when faced with all the evidence, it's quite clear that he was responsible. He still maintained his innocence through his silence. So when it actually came to being confronted with the reality, I don't think he really wanted to admit it, you know? And I think he actually just decided, well, I'm just going to say nothing.
You will have benefited from her death, is that correct? Why do you say that? Financially, you would have benefited from her death, would you not say? Did you just lose control, just lose it? Some big argument, and you killed her. And you've been covering up ever since. Because if that's what's happened, you need to tell us now.
So he's silent and uncommunicative in the police station, and indeed we know that subsequently at court he refuses to give any evidence, he refuses to attend a trial. So he maintains this silent and uncommunicative approach thereafter. But that leaves us with a big question, which is the simple one. Why? Not who done it, but why done it? Why does he kill his fiancée? We can hardly say it's for the money, because he had the money. He was well looked after. He had status within that local community. Why does he want to kill Helen?
Well, that's, in many ways, we'd only sort of find out if we asked him and if he was communicative and shared that. It can't simply be for money per se, because he had access to that. So therefore, one might deduce that it's about control, about he could then spend the money that would have come to him anyway, and Helen would have given to him in the way that he wanted to.
Owing to his silence and his lies during all lines of inquiry, we may never know his real motive for the murder, whether financial or otherwise. In spite of this, Ian Stewart was found guilty of Helen Bailey's murder and was sentenced to 34 years in prison. He will be 90 years old before being considered for parole.
Hello there. My partner has been missing since Monday.
He was on to make a fortune. All he had to do in his own mind was hold his nerve, defeat authorities and the police investigation, and walk away with £1.5 million.
The first thing I remember was we loaded the car, or Helen loaded my car, with an old duvet and some boxes ready scented on.
All the bumbling, the act that he was performing, if you like, in front of the media, in front of friends and family, that was all a charade. That was all to cover up this dark, devious nature that he had and desire to be wealthy. He was a very selfish man.
The fact that the sons can now claim part of the fortune because they were included in the will, of course, is just another betrayal of Helen, and it's heartbreaking, really. She didn't deserve this, and she was just somebody who was looking to open a new chapter of her life with a loving partner, and she ended up with a homicidal swindler.
You will have benefited from her death, is that correct?
At 56 years old, it is highly unusual that a person of Stewart's age would suddenly commit a murder without any previous history of violent behaviour. Ian Stewart's deception was one that was planned over many months. Helen's murder was entirely premeditated.
Was that duvet taken to the tip because it had Helen's blood on it?
Well, it's very unusual to commit an offence like that, which is so calculating and planned, without there being any sort of antecedents to the behaviour. This wasn't a crime of passion, this wasn't sort of instinctive, this wasn't reactive to anything, this was planned. And therefore, if somebody engages in that degree of planned activity, it's right to ask the question, well, what has he planned before?
Normally, we'd expect men to commit murder in their late teens and early 20s. Most homicides are committed by mid-30s. And then we suddenly get an increase again with retired men killing partners and things like that. But 56 is quite an unusual age to kill, especially when you've got as far as we know, no previous history of violence.
It's the cunning and callousness of Ian Stewart that makes his story such a memorable one. But at the centre of this story is Helen Bailey, a grieving woman who tragically fell into his grasp.
This isn't a murder that was about money. This is a murder about Ian Stewart acting out this destructive and extreme victim narrative which has taken hold within him. And Helen Bailey is actually the victim of that storyline.
This is a woman who's so very, very vulnerable. She's just looking for happiness for the rest of her life, and he's completely taken advantage of that. He's fed her lie after lie, and all the time he's been plotting an alternative reality. He was never going to marry her. It was always going to be about him taking her money.
He wasn't satisfied with what he had. He could have really had a happy ever after with Helen, and she was generous and she was kind and she loved him, and she really thought that he was going to be the happy ever after that she should have maybe had with her late husband.
It's a low-grade, pathetic, tragic case, a relatively straightforward, profit-driven, manipulative, cynical seduction and murder. This man is contemptible and deserves his punishment completely.